Okay, so let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the characters in the Crucible because you're going to want to become very familiar with them. We are going to be watching the movie, so a lot of the images that I show you, actually all of the images that I show you, will have the movie character there. Okay, so let's talk about who's whom. Okay, Reverend Samuel Parris, his role, he's a reverend, duh. Okay, his stature, though, this is interesting. You'd think that as a reverend, he would be very well respected by the community since it's a theocracy, but this particular Reverend Samuel Parris, was not well respected by his congregation. However, he feels entitled to respect because of his status as a reverend. So he kind of was like, "You guys should respect me," but people are like, "Nah, we don't respect you." Okay. He becomes an accuser. Okay. So he starts to accuse other people, and his motivation stems from him desiring to assert his power over his congregation, right? Like, you have to listen to me, and if you don't, watch out, you might be accused, right? It's also out of self-preservation, and I'll let you figure out what that means as we start to get going in the actual text and in the movie. Some other details about him: he pays very little attention to children. He has children, but he pays very little attention to them because, as you probably read in Setting the Stage, children just weren't valued until you could really like hold your own as an adult. They really didn't care about children, right? They were expected to just be seen but not heard, all that stuff. Okay. He views them as young adults that should be grateful to be alive. And if you have any experience with kids, that's not typically their attitude. He gets very offended very, very easily. He's offended by grown adults doing things without asking his permission. Like, dude, come on, who are you? Okay. But he gets very, very offended very, very easily, and he assumes everybody is like against him. Okay. And some of them kind of are. All right. Tituba is Reverend Parris's slave. She is the only Black character in this novel. And she is, appropriate to the time, she was a slave. And her stature, you can take a guess. As a slave, she has no voice or rights. And as far as whether she gets accused or she is the accuser, I would imagine you could guess that yes, she gets accused because, of course, slaves would be an easy scapegoat. But she also turns to be the accuser as well. So I'll let you figure out how that plays out as you watch Act 1. Motivation, well, for being accused, people were motivated to accuse her because she's an easy target. She's a scapegoat, right? But as for why she decides to turn and be the accuser, it was out of self-preservation. She accuses others to take the heat off of herself. Right? Some other details: she is from Barbados, which is known for its practice of obeah, which is like a spiritual and healing set of practices. And so you can imagine why they would initially turn to her for a source of witchcraft, right? Abigail Williams, I'm not going to tell you too much about her. You're not going to like her, I can tell you that. But her role, she is Reverend Parris's orphaned niece, and so he takes care of her. She's in his household. She is also the caretaker of his daughter, Betty Parris, and she is the artist formerly known as the Proctor's servant. At this time, it was very common for girls, as they started to get older, they would actually leave their own homes, and they would go and work in someone else's home as their servant in order to learn how to be a good wife. So there you go. Her stature, well, even though she looks 17 there, well, that's what she's supposed to be in the movie, she is considered a child, but she is the leader amongst the children. But she's still a child, so she doesn't necessarily often get listened to outside of the Salem witch trials. She is an accuser, and as for the motivation for accusing other people, I will let you figure that out. It's interesting. Okay, John Proctor. I said Abigail Williams was a servant within John Proctor's house. His role, he's a farmer, okay, so just a normal farmer. His stature, he's actually very well respected. He's viewed as someone with high moral character. He's generally even-tempered, although you'll see there are a couple of times in the play that he really gets angry, but it's kind of understandable. He's fairly down to earth. So he's not trying to be holier than thou. He's like, hey, I get it. We're all people, right? His words have influence over the town. So he is a big deal in the town. As far as accuser, he becomes the accused, but that happens much later, so I'll let you kind of watch that play out. Motivation. Well, why would somebody accuse John Proctor? Well, he makes other people feel bad about their own wrongdoing. Not because he goes and points fingers and says, hey, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. It's because people see him and he's a guy of integrity, and they go, oh, I don't have as much integrity as that guy. You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of like jealous of his goodness, and so people don't really like that. It's like he could make you feel bad about yourself without even trying, right? Other details: he carries the weight of a secret sin. Okay, so although people look at him and say, wow, that's a guy full of integrity, he believes himself to be a fraud in that respect, because there's a secret sin in his heart. And you'll see what that is. He can be abrasive, meaning he can sometimes get really, firm and kind of aggressive, but he's a legitimately good guy that wants to do the right thing. Next one. Elizabeth Proctor, I'm not going to say anything about her other than she is John Proctor's wife, and you'll get to know her a little bit better as you read the play. Mary Warren, remember how Abigail Williams was the Proctor's servant? Well, Mary Warren is their current servant. She is, again, considered a child, and she is a servant, so she has very little voice in the community. As far as whether she gets accused or she is the accuser, we're going to start with accuser, okay? And we'll see what happens from there. Motivation is peer pressure, okay? She sees her friends accusing other people of witchcraft, and she goes, oh, yeah, okay, I'll join in on that, okay? So kind of interesting. Giles and Martha Corey, I love them. They're great. Giles is a farmer, and he is the town fool in some ways. He's an old man. He doesn't really care what others think of him. He's kind of late to the game in terms of his Bible knowledge and kind of as a Christian, so he doesn't know things as well as some other more devout Christians do. Martha Corey is viewed as odd. So that's his wife. She's viewed as odd, and anything odd is dangerous in the Puritan society. But she's viewed as odd because she enjoys reading. Okay, so some of us girls out there would be easy targets in the witch trials if you enjoy reading. Okay. Motivation. And by the way, when I say reading, I mean like novels. She enjoys reading novels and poetry and all that stuff. I guess not novels, because there weren't novels back then, but poetry, okay? Motivation. He is kind of a fool, okay? And she is an intellectual woman, which again is threatening or dangerous. I forgot to mention whether or not they're the accused or the accuser. Well, it gets a little tricky because it's both, okay? He accidentally accuses his own wife. Okay, how that plays out, I'll let you see. But let's go ahead and look at these other details. Giles is often accused of various things in the village, so he's been in court many times. He actually has a lot of legal knowledge. So although he's kind of a goofball, he knows what he's talking about when it comes to the law and when it comes to courts. Giles, like I said, accidentally accuses Martha while asking if her book reading is normal. So he kind of accidentally throws her under the bus. And then third one, Giles was the one guy that was pressed to death. So if you remember, a lot of people were hanged, 19 people were hanged, and then one guy was pressed to death. That was Giles. And I will tell you, well, actually, you'll find out why he was pressed to death as you go through the book. Thomas and Ann Putnam, okay, they're wealthy landowners. They are known for trying to assert power over others. He, in particular, is very outspoken and not well liked, and he is not someone you want to cross. He's the kind of guy that has money, and he believes that money equals power, and so he believes that you shouldn't cross him because he has the power to screw you over, okay? As far as accused or accuser, they are the accusers, okay? And motivation has to do with the fact that they're vindictive, right? If you cross them, then they want to get back at you. When he doesn't get his way in particular, he also accuses others over land disputes. Okay, if you were placed in jail for witchcraft, then your land is automatically forfeit. And if your land is forfeit, guess who can come in and swoop up on that land? Mr. Putnam. So he would actually put people in prison, or get people put in prison, in order to take their land, right? And then jealousy as well, which we'll kind of get to in a second. Some details. He had a man imprisoned once for not paying a debt that the man didn't even owe. Okay, so that's how bad this guy is. This guy's just awful. Number 2, he tried to break his father's will in order to get more than was given to him. So you can see he's quite greedy. He even goes against his own father's will. Number 3, his brother-in-law tried to become a pastor, but Francis Nurse stopped it. So you can imagine that led to some vindictive behavior there, right? Like, oh, why'd you stop my brother from doing what he wants to do? Number 4, they had a high infant mortality, meaning many of their babies died, okay? Only 1 out of 8 children survived, which means that she tried to have 8 babies, but only 1 actually made it. So a lot of her babies ended up dying. And then number 5, they used their daughter to accuse others, okay? So instead of them actually accusing, they used their daughter to do it. So they say, hey, Ruth, go accuse that person, okay? Rebecca Nurse, she is a farmer's wife, the wife of Francis Nurse, and she's a grandmother. She is very, very well respected in the community. She's viewed as kind of like a Mother Teresa type, so she's very charitable. Her husband is also well respected and often called upon to be an unofficial judge in civil disputes. So they are very, very well respected, and so you can imagine, because you know how this goes, are they the accused or the accuser? They get accused, okay? In particular, Rebecca Nurse does. Motivation for why they accused Rebecca Nurse, one has to do with a land dispute with the Putnams. Putnams wanted the Nurse's land, especially because initially the Putnams owned the Nurse's land, but the Nurses worked really, really hard to earn enough money to buy that land, and then they bought it, right? Well, the Putnams said, I don't care that you bought it. That was our land to begin with. Anyway. That's one reason. They also have a jealousy of her family because if you take a look at these details, Rebecca Nurse has 11 children and 26 grandchildren. Remember, the Putnams tried to have 8 babies and lost all of them except 1. So in general, there were also old grudges because remember, Francis Nurse blocked Putnam's brother from becoming a pastor. So there were grudges there as well. Again, number 1, they originally rented their land, but they slowly bought it. Number 2, they actually started a whole town apart from Salem. So they are, like I said, big people in the community. Reverend Hale, well, he was a reverend, duh. He was also a witchcraft specialist or expert, okay? So he is called in because he knows a lot about witchcraft. He knows a lot about whether or not someone's a witch. He's good at telling whether or not someone's a witch. He is actually very well respected. He's incredibly intellectual. His expertise is trusted, which also leads him to be a little bit full of himself. He becomes an accuser, but his motivation is actually solid. Okay, everybody else is like, oh, it's really petty reasonings for, accusing others. But for Reverend Hale, he actually wants to find the truth. So he is on the side of the accusers, but he really truly believes in witchcraft. He really truly believes in the unseen worlds, the spirits and all that. And he believes that when he is, when he does kind of deal with someone who's been accused of witchcraft, he believes that he's helping them. Okay, that he's freeing those that confess of their ties with the devil. So he believes he's kind of doing some form of like an exorcism type of thing. So Reverend Hale has good intentions, but unfortunately he falls on the wrong side of these trials. Other details about him, once an afflicted girl was allowed to stay in his house and she ended up getting better, okay? So someone who was sick or afflicted with some sort of illness that was supposedly caused by witches, she got better once she was in Reverend Hale's house. And that's true, actually. Number 2, prior to coming to Salem, he examined a suspected witch and determined that she was not a witch. So again, Reverend Hale isn't out to like make everybody's lives miserable. He's not like, you're a witch, you're a witch, you're a witch, because that doesn't benefit him, right? So for him, he was about finding the truth. And so when he determined, hey, this person, not a witch, then he said she's not a witch, right? So he did actually determine some people that were not witches. And that's it. Thanks.